Hello, everybody. Thank you for the chance to come and speak with you. It's quite intimidating to follow Hilmar. That was really a wonderful presentation that he gave. I'm going to bring it back home a little bit. I'm going to talk about how I think that VR and AR, immersive technologies, are going to affect our industry in the short to medium term, and talk about some of the things that are going on that are going to impact us. And it's interesting to note that not everybody is a believer in immersive technologies. Not everybody is as excited about it as I am and Hilmar is. But I think that the cat is out of the bag, and it's too late, and I'm going to tell you why. But it's interesting to note that we're here today because of a sewing machine sprocket. In 1891, Thomas Edison invented the kinetoscope, and it's not generally remembered that you had to put your head down onto it. And it was the Lumiere brothers 5 years later in 1895 that added a sewing machine sprocket and invented the cinematograph. I can't really pronounce that. From that day, from 1895 until 2016, we've effectively looked through a window. And that window, whether it's on a smartphone screen or a cinema or on your television screen, we are the other side of the window. We've had 121 years of being on one side of it. With immersive technologies, with VR, we step through the window and go into the other side. That's very exciting for some, but we need to remember, luminaries and leaders of our industry here, that for some people that's intimidating. It really does change everything. And so we're going to have to work out how to take people from that one side of the window and step them through to the other side. It won't be obvious and natural for everybody. Now, VR is estimated to be growing at all kinds of astronomical rates. And I know that everybody in the room has read the same reports and articles. It's going to be this big, it's going to be this many $1 billion, it's going to be this many users. But I think what we need to do is to take a step back. Even if you love something, sometimes you have to be realistic about it. And if we get to 100 million consumers over 10 years, according to one recent report, that still needs to be seen in context. So let's go a little bit back again. John Petty Research believes that next year, between Oculus HTC and Sony, there'll be 2.7 million headsets shipped. That's a good start. But if we're going to get to 100 million, clearly we have to accelerate a great deal faster, and we have to do a lot of work. Let's make a comparison now to PC gaming. Steam has 125 million users right now. Intel believes that there are 711 million PC gamers right now. So if we're going to go and create this industry and do all the things that Hilmar talked about, clearly we've got to get on with it. So I think that the task in front of us is very, very large, very exciting, but there is a lot of work. And what I'm going to touch on this morning is some of the things that we're doing right now to make that happen. If you look at the reward of making that happen, however, it's enormous. If you look at the top 10 countries by game revenues, all game revenues, online and mobile, it's $75 billion. So the rewards for solving some of these problems and creating this new industry are going to be very, very large. So I think the immersive technology impact is going to be really, really enormous. Really enormous. And I think it's going to be enormous both for the new industry by itself, but also the existing gaming industry, and I think that's going to be true because of 4 reasons. First is the impact of immersion. It's interesting that in order for us to think about these other worlds that Hilmar's talking about, you've got to believe in them. As immersive as EVE Online is, and I know that it is, as devoted fans around the world, you're still on the other side of that screen. If we can step through that screen and create deeper immersion, I think some fantastic things will happen. We also know that the investments are coming, but I think we're going to see disruption in tools, and we're going to see disruption in experiences. So let's talk about immersion first of all. VR and immersive technologies give us the ability to be far deeper in the experiences that we create. The reason that we love games is they take us into other worlds. We can be a spaceman, we can be an avenging warrior, we can be whatever we want to be. But with VR, we can do that even much, much more deeply. Now, we know that kind of anecdotally, we know that as leaders in this industry, but there is actually some science for this. The University of Virginia did some experiment. They created this room here, and they did it in 2 ways. They did it one as a normal screen, and they did the other way in a VR, and then they did some tests to see how fast you could identify objects. They found that in VR, you could identify objects nearly almost 100% faster than you can looking through the screen on the other side of the window. So the immersion that we can create is really incredible. Now, that's the science of it. I want to just show you a short video of of being in a VR experience and the size, the order of the magnitude of the different immersion we have in a kind of fun way. So can we run the video?
Ah!
It's scary, I just heard something.
Paranormal Activity VR was revealed at GDC recently, and everybody was talking about it. We wanted to see how scary it actually was, so we had the developers come here to IGN and had a bunch of IGN people play the game. Here's how scary it was.
Oh, Jesus. I'm in a room. Man, this is already not fun.
The child's music is not okay.
How do you turn on a flashlight in VR?
You need batteries.
Man, I really hate this a lot. Okay.
Well, that's really creepy.
I don't feel like I'm in a safe space.
All right, let's stop the video there.
This is bizarre.
I'm not going to run the whole
If I was
thing.
going to keep...
The reason I showed that to you is there have been scary games. There's been Silent Hill. We've had scary games for a long, long time. But nothing is as scary as the paranormal experience. And here's the interesting thing. Even though you know that you're in it, you're still so immersed, it's still terrifying. I've done it myself. And actually a video of me, I couldn't find it, where I'm saying, I know it's not real, and still jumping out of my skin. Now, immersion is important because once you've experienced that, and I'm talking today about VR having an impact on non-VR games, once you've experienced that, it's kind of hard to go back. It's hard to unimmerse. It's hard to say to yourself, well, I want to just go back and be on the other side of the window again. Once we step through and we're in it, I don't want to go back. And so I think that VR is going to have a huge impact because even if you're making traditional format games, consumer expectation is going to increase because they've had those kind of experiences. Now, I have the image here of EVE Online because it was actually Hilmar about a year ago that gave me this insight, that he has players that play for many, many long hours and live in the world just as he described. But that's through a screen. Now imagine you step through to it. How much stronger is that immersion going to be? I think it's going to be very, very, very profound. Now, however, if you want to create that experience, if you want to go to your boss and you want to say, give me $100 million to go and make a new Oasis for Ready Player One, for example, he's going to go back to those numbers earlier and say, sure, how are you going to get me my return on my investment? 2.7 million units next year, a total install base of 2.7 million isn't going to be big enough. And even when we get to 100 million in 10 years, that's not soon enough. To make these visions come true, we need financing. And so we've got to do something about the installed base. It's interesting that Battlefield 4 cost $100 million plus to make for Electronic Arts. They sold more than 10 million copies. But you couldn't make Battlefield in VR right now today because you don't have an install base of 10 million units. So this is a big issue. Now, what is the outcome of this? What's going on? Well, one of the interesting things is, when we launched, AMD launched a graphics card recently, there was a huge internal debate. It went and raged about what price to sell the graphics card for. And in the end, we decided to sell it as aggressively as we could. Now, the cynical amongst you would say, well, yeah, you had to do that. You're competing with the other guy, and they're really, really strong. That wasn't the only reason we did it. I'm being absolutely sincere to you. It wasn't the only reason we did it. We also did it because we believe that the opportunity for VR is absolutely enormous. But if VR computers are expensive, the adoption will be slow. So we launched the card at a very aggressive price. And here today, in Europe, CSL Computers will sell you a VR-ready desktop PC for 699 euros. And we believe, however, that's just a start. We've got to get the price down. The more accessible we can make VR, the more people will use it. Now, I'm also pleased to tell you, however, that some people aren't waiting. Vlatko Antonov and the teams at Bethesda aren't waiting for that installed base. They have announced that Fallout 4 will be coming to VR next year. And so I applaud them and I salute them for taking that step, that they're not waiting for the installed base, they're just going ahead. The interesting thing is, if you compare Fallout 4, the traditional way, to trying it in VR, Adi Robertson at The Verge recently tried it. And what she found out was the experience of playing Fallout 4 in VR was dramatically different. That first of all, you had to play it a lot slower, because being so deeply immersed just wasn't the same as being on the other side of the window. And this, I think, is, again, this immersion is so important, so exciting. So I salute them, and if anyone else wants to go ahead and make the investment, then please do. We're going to do all we can to make the price accessible. So let's look at the second thing. So I'll talk about immersion, the importance of immersion for our industry. The second thing that's happening is the pipeline itself is being changed dramatically. For 360 VR, we're seeing new cameras. I'm going to skip that today because we're not in the 360 business. But we are seeing that renderers are changing. Renderers, which were once used by the movie industry to produce very, very high-quality visuals for special effects, are now being used in all manner of ways, right across the board, but also for us in our industry. I'll come back to that a little bit in a moment. And we're also seeing light fields. I want to show you something really exciting for you about light fields. Game engines, which were just used for making games, are now being used to do everything from consumer electronics to architectural design. The tools themselves that we know are also being changed with VR. The professional tool companies realize the tools as they exist today aren't fit for the purpose exactly the way we want to. So every major professional tools company is producing VR versions. The other thing that's interesting is the people that are using game engines that are producing games are also changing. 2 years ago, I didn't know the previs industry. The previs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but the previs industry is coming together with the games industry. And then even the platforms themselves are changing. We already know about consoles, we already know about PCs, but location-based VR is going to bring us a return of the arcade. Let me talk a little bit about the previs. So this is Chris Roberts, the CEO of the Third Floor. The Third Floor is one of the preeminent previs companies. Pre-visualization was used in the movie industry to recreate scenes before you do expensive filming. So you can see here how it works. And the visuals weren't that good because they didn't have to be good. They were literally just to construct a scene. But today, that's not the case. Most of the Hollywood VR which is being made, which we call VRE, VR experiences like The Martian, Jurassic World, Sleepy Hollow, or Paranormal Activity they're kind of interesting because they're not games as we think of them as games, but they're being used with game engines. And there's more than 200 of these have been made. So the previs industry is coming to the gaming industry. And Chris believes there really isn't any difference. And so he says, our work is a universal craft towards visualization, whether it's film industry or it's video game cinematics. So there's lots of disruption happening there. And I think that we, as the games leaders, can learn from the previs industry, and they certainly are learning from the game industry. I mentioned renderers. We're seeing renderers, as I said, which we use in the movie industry, now being used to create this VR. And I think that already Blender, for example, here in Amsterdam has 200,000 users. We're going to see renderers hit and impact our industry to create really, really high-quality visuals at much lower prices than we ever saw before. Now, the other thing is, I'm talking about light fields. Mark Zuckerberg was in Rome recently, and he said he thinks that the killer app for VR is going to be social. And so that made me realize if we're going to be in VR socially, then we're going to want to look like ourselves. I want to show you, and I presume everybody in this room knows about light fields, some work that was done by USC, ICT, to capture a particular very important man, and then to create a hologram and use that with speech recognition to do something pretty special. Can we show the second video, please?
My name is Pinchas Gutter. I will answer any questions you might have for me.
How old were you when the war ended?
I was between the ages of 13 and 14 when the war ended in 1945.
Do you remember any songs from your youth?
This is a lullaby that my mother used to sing to me, and I still remember it. It's in Polish. Jadą dzieci, jadą drogą, siostrzyczka I brat, i nawidzieć się nie mogą, jaki piękny świat.
Now, I've actually done that myself. I've spoken to Pinchas myself as a hologram, and it really does work that well. It's quite extraordinary. So how is this impacting the gaming industry? Well, we already know that in games right now, you can import your image yourself. but I think the quality is going to improve fast, and the impact of that is going to be pretty big too. This is a scan I did of, I had done of myself by Alex Henry in Los Angeles. It was kind of weird to be scanned in and to see yourself that way. I think that at some point soon, nearly everybody in the gaming industry is going to have a digital version of themselves. Of course, in the final one, I'll have a six-pack and bigger shoulders, and I'll look a bit younger. But I think that we're going to have an entire world made up of digital versions of ourselves along the lines that Hilmar was talking about. Now, what's the other impact that VR and AR is having? Well, a lot of the people that are making VR are not traditional big game companies. They're independents. And independents often don't have a lot of money, and they don't have lawyers. So we are seeing a move towards open standards and open source. At AMD, we made a decision a couple of years ago that all the software we would make, whether it's rendering software, whether it was liquid VR, everything that we do is available on GitHub as open source. We think this is part of a trend. And I think it's a very important thing that we all do where we can. Of course, we must protect intellectual property, but where we can, we should do this. And the reason being is that we can go much faster if we do that. If we don't ask somebody to sign contracts and get lawyers involved, if we just let content creators get access immediately to content, to the tools they need, we can speed things up. And I think that's important. Now, the other thing we're going to see is much higher resolutions in headsets coming much faster than we think. And the reason for that is there's a correlation between our immersion, go back to that point, immersion again, between resolution and proximity to the eyeball. If you can see the pixels, you're not looking at what the director or the game developer wants you to look at. You're not immersed, you're looking at the pixels. So the current headsets are great, but you can see the pixels. With a 4K headset, that goes away. We've been working for over nearly 18 months now with a company based out of New York called Immersion. They have a 4K headset. This is it here. It's very comfortable. It's much lighter than the other headsets. And the experience is absolutely fantastic. So the need for much higher resolutions in VR is having an impact on traditional gaming because we're having to invent new tools. Recently at SIGGRAPH, we announced this professional graphics card, SSG. What we've done is we took a 1 terabyte SSD array and we put it straight onto the GPU. And the reason we did that is because we know that the demand for higher resolutions, high performance is coming. So by putting that SSD onto the GPU and changing the professional graphics card in a way that's never been seen before, we're able to run 8K RAW and at 90 frames a second. There's this tool which we invented to do this particular job. We've now been inundated with hundreds and hundreds of inquiries from traditional video game makers finding new ways to use these tools. So this is what I mean when I say that VR and AR is having an impact on traditional gaming right now. The other thing is the demands upon us for VR are enormous. If we're going to come anywhere near to making Hilmar's vision come true, we've got a lot of work to do. You know, the current headsets are 2K resolution, about 10 milliseconds of latency, and run at 90 frames a second. And that's approximately equal to about 8 teraflops of performance. If we're going to the human visual system, is about 24K, but we believe that at 16K, that will be close enough for the job to be done. But if we want to run 16K resolution at, say, 144 peak frames per second with zero latency, that's 743 teraflops. That's 81 times more performance than we have today. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've also got a lot of job security. But following that trend is going to put tools in your hands to do incredible things with traditional formats too. Now, when I was a kid, when I was a young man, I used to go to play video games in arcades, and of course arcades went away because we made the processing to play video games cheap enough to have at home. I believe that with VR, in order to get to hundreds of millions of consumers, not everybody can afford a $1,000, $1,500 VR set, and quite frankly, not everybody wants all the wires and the setup. It takes room in the house, and it's off-putting for some people. So by putting VR where people can access it, whether it's in a movie theater lobby here, or whether it's in anywhere where people get together, a shopping mall, or electronic dance festival, whatever, we're going to allow more people to try VR. Now here's the interesting thing, that's an idea, but in China it's already happening. Bachi Lin and VRLE are two location-based companies already in thousands of locations. Here's the other thing that's really interesting. If you were to guess how much they charge for experiencing the VR, you might think, well, it's China, so I know $1. No, they charge $10 a time, and it's successful. The appetite for this is incredible. Now, again, so what's the impact of this on traditional gaming? Well, we're going to start thinking about arcades again and about locations again. If you're going to make any kind of content and if these things are going to be there, that creates new opportunities for us. Now, the other thing is the experiences themselves are also changing. I want to talk about audio for a second. It's my personal opinion that we haven't had the audio that we could have deserved in video games and actually also in movies. And I think the reason for that is if you look at a cinema auditorium, if you're making the audio, you have to cater for the fact that the lowest common experience might be somebody in the middle of a 600-seat theater. And if you're making a console game, most consoles are rigged up to TV screens in the living room, and then you have these living room speakers. As a result of that, a lot of the sound that we get tends to be environmental and bangs, crashes, whooshes, large sounds. What we don't get is whispering. You don't get a lot of occlusion. You don't get a lot of subtle sound because you can't, because most people won't be able to experience it. Why would you spend money putting really, really high-quality sound into an experience where it can't be enjoyed? But with VR, we know you've got the headset. We know exactly what the experience is going to be for sound. And so you can do some really, really cool things. Imagine, for example, walking into an elevator. There's nobody in the elevator. The door's shut, and the lights go out, and a voice says, "Good evening, just here." You jump out of your skin. There's all kinds of very cool things that we can do in audio now that we have this virtual reality, and I think that'll also have impacts on how we think about how we start to use audio. The other thing we know is that VR changes our perspective. It used to be said, don't judge somebody until you've walked in their shoes. In VR, we can walk in their shoes. There's some incredibly interesting experiments going on right now in many facets of this. This is an experiment where you have the headset on, and as you look at your body, if you're a man, it's a woman, and if you're a woman, it's a man. If we make you stand taller in VR, it can make you more confident in real life. And we know that VR is already being used in medicine in many, many incredible ways. We work quite closely with a really wonderful man in USC, Dr. Skip Rizzo, who uses VR to treat PTSD, very successfully too. I think that the ability to have new perspectives actually might make us nicer people. And so I'm very, very excited about what this can do. But I also think, again, it resonates through to traditional gaming because it'll start to change the way we think about how we create characters. Now, to come to the end of my talk, I also want to talk about how VR is changing our concept of time. So I got the idea after trying out the Martian. The Martian VR experience from Fox is about 30 minutes long. Now, after I tried it and I took the headset off, I thought to myself, 30 minutes? That felt like 5 minutes. And so I became really, really curious. So I actually met up with a couple of professors and asked them about this. And I also went online, and I found the University of Hamburg's work by Dr. Gerd Bruder that says that far from just being an idea, an anecdotal, a feeling, actually there's significant evidence that we can change the way we think about time. I met another professor who's doing some research to try and treat epileptic fits. And we'll be able to share his work soon that shows there's real science to this. That the time that you spend in real life, in virtual reality, can get distorted. What's fun about this is we might be able to speed it up as well as slow it down. I think this is going to be very, very profound, enormously profound. So when you add all of these things up that are going on in VR right now, even if there's only 2.7 million headsets sold next year, and I'm very optimistic there'll be many, many more than that, if you look at the things that are going on in immersion, and if you look at the way the tool chains are changing, you can't help but know that these changes can't be undone. There's no way of going back. that even if that many don't sell, and even if the first wave of consumers may be a little disappointed because they don't have all the content they want yet, there is no going back. And I think that the fact that companies like Bethesda are willing to make the investment and make fantastic VR experiences right now is incredible. And I think that these changes are so big that we just can't go back and get away from them. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for the chance to come along and talk to you.